Round 18, Warriors versus the Rabbits. It was meant to be a rabbit extermination, but unfortunately the shoe was on the other foot last night, so let's take a look how this played out. Hey team, welcome back to the Warriorholic on the back of one of our probably more disappointing efforts all season. But if we're honest with ourselves, we were beaten by a very clinical, genuine top 4 team last night. Whilst they may not be sitting there on the competition ladder, South clearly showed that they're a class outfit and they're a level above. While I think it was disappointing, I think it was a timely reminder for both us as fans and for the club of what's really needed to take it to the next level if we're going to be genuinely competitive at the back half of the season. So let's take the positives out of this loss, is that it's going to be a real learning point, and I'm pretty sure Webby will have identified what went wrong for us, and we'll hopefully be putting action plans in place so that it doesn't happen again. First up, let's take a quick look at some of the stats, which they're pretty even across a lot of them, but a few of them really stand out as what were the difference on the night. 44 versus 56% possession. Probably didn't reflect the score in the end. It was more even than the score would have demonstrated, but 69% completion versus 92. 25 of 36 versus 35 of 38. On any night, that's going to be extremely hard for the team with 69% to compete against, but particularly in that weather when you can't play catch-up footy. Absolutely outstanding from Souths here. If we look at all runs, they got 40 more runs than us, 300 more metres run than us, post-contact metres 120 metres more than us, 3 more line breaks. We got a heck of a lot of tackle breaks, but we just weren't able to convert on them. We had a way faster play of the ball there. 7 offloads to 3. I don't think it was a game you wanted to throw too many offloads, but I think they threw them at the right time, and that second phase footy worked out really well for them. Kicks, it's interesting here. 16 kicks for us versus 30 for them. That's twice as many, and almost twice as many meters. SJ only kicking for 460 odd meters versus 760. But of those there, if we look at the grubbers for me, 6 grubbers for them, which I felt was the play in the weather, whereas for us, SJ just kept putting that ball up in the air right down into Johnson's corner, dropped them in his bread basket all night. I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. Tackling efficiency, 93.4% is one of our best efforts this year. A great effort. Better than them. Way less missed tackles than them, but our ineffective tackles, I think, cost us again. It's that second phase ball that we're able to use more effectively. So 13 ineffective tackles for us versus 5 for them. So finally the error count there, 13 errors for us versus 3 for them. It seems like a way too many errors for us, 13 there, but to be honest, that's about our 3rd week in a row when we've been up around the 13, 14 mark for the errors, but in previous weeks we've been matched by our opposition, which probably gives us a false sense of security for how well we were playing. Whereas South, 3 errors, and that type of weather was just absolute first class. And I go back to an interview I heard on Martin Devlin's show with Sir Graham Lowe way back in about round 6, where he talked about us having a really good team, but not quite being there with the absolute best. And he said the difference is the precision and level of clinical play that the other real genuine top teams are able to execute in the big games. And I think we saw that from South last night. Off the back of 5 weeks of pretty average footy, they were able to step it up and take it to a level that I don't think we've played with at all this year. I wouldn't imagine we've had any games with only 3 errors, much less in that range. So for me, I think that's a big differentiation between them and where we're at right now. We can put away teams who are not quite on their game. We can make errors against those teams, but against the likes of Penrith, we saw how they played against the Storm last night. Absolutely clinical. Even the Storm themselves. There are a few teams in this comp that will absolutely punish you if you have 13 errors in a game. We came up against one last night. So all credit to Souths. Their defence has been absolutely terrible for the past 5 weeks, letting in an average of about 30 points. Last night they just stepped up and took up the challenge and matched us all across the park. So I'm not going to get all into the individual player ratings today. I just want to touch on a few areas of the game that I think were really indicative of the outcome. So first of all, just to reiterate, Souths, their effort. It reminded me of State of Origin 2, where we had two really good teams, but one of them just wanted it more. And thanks to the effort, I think they just tended to get the bounce of the ball. All of those 50-50 balls that they sort of dropped or kind of spilled forward or kicked and there was a loose ball, they just happened to get there first. A couple of their tries, through the kicks, they just wanted it more. They were more hungry than us. You talk about the refs' calls. We got our share of penalties in the beginning, but we weren't able to convert. But that AFB sin bidding, that was a turning point. That was no more impactful than the at least two of the head highs that the South did. You can't blame that for the game because I think we had more than enough ball in the first half there to get a decent lead. But things like, I noticed Adam Pompey was pulled back, ironically, on one of the tries he was competing for. Clearly had his jersey pulled, but it wasn't noticed. I think that kick where the young fella Munro scored, I think it was Elias, took out Ford quite clearly. Even they mentioned it in the commentary, but that was ignored. And I think things like that happen for a team who's on top on the night, not because it was the Warriors against South. It was just because Souths were wanting it more, they were competing more, and the games always just naturally tend to go with those teams. So, all power to them. So that was one part for me. I think we saw the class of their halves combination. Cody Walker, we just put so much effort into marking up on him. SJ ran up on him a couple of times and missed him and created that sort of broken line, forcing Berry to come out of the line as well, and then left Dallin isolated, and they waltzed over for a couple of tries there. It probably didn't help having Barnett on the edge there with him, an unfamiliar person marking up. But yeah, that right edge of ours really struggled, I think, to handle Cody all night. That was a good learning point for us, what a quality half he is and what we're going to have to compete with against if we do get into the finals. It's those teams with a quality half pairing. And for me, I think that the way that they were able to kind of split the play, split the kicking between their two halves rather than just being 100% Cody-centric is kind of something we need to learn from. We're always way too Sean-centric, and I think he just struggled last night. He's played outstanding this year when we've been on the front foot, but this is an example of when we're not going, things aren't going to plan. He kind of struggled, and I really wanted him to step up and have a bit more variety in his kicking game, like I mentioned earlier, kicking it straight down Johnston's throat time after time, when apparently, guys who were at the game said the young fella Munro had dropped a couple of kicks in warm-up there, so he would have been nervous. Why didn't we test him out? Why didn't we put more ball on the ground, make them catch a bouncing ball? We saw that a number of times from both of their halves. Put a bit of indecision in them. So I think that was one of the things that really sort of disappointed me, is that SJ as a half really struggled to sort of get control, sort the boys out and get them back on track, and particularly win the kicking game there. So hopefully he'll learn from that as well. And I thought his leadership with Tohu was probably an example that, whilst we did have that really good turnaround against the Sharks, in a couple of games where we've sort of struggled to kind of get our game plan going, we haven't had that leadership on the field to really grab the boys, shake them up, turn them around and get their heads back in it. And Webby talked about it in the post game that, we kept seeming to trying to go wide and, play that same sort of game plan we played against St George last week. But it was so easy for us, to get run down in that wet weather. They just drifted across, stayed on their line, didn't rush up out, and by the time the ball got to the wingers, they had no room to go and had two or three guys in front of them. So all credit to South there for just maintaining a line and drifting across and nullified our defence. We weren't able to sort of straighten it up or use those change of directions, go through them rather than around them, which is really disappointing. But on that note, I think it's another example that we probably don't have a team built for wet weather footy. We've got a light, really quick, mobile, fit pack who've won games on tiring out our opposition through really fast, direct footy, spinning it across the ground from side to side, tiring out our opposition to the point that we're able to run through them in the past 20, but you just can't do that in the wet. We came up against a team with 5 props, and a hooker is built like a prop, so in his second stint, Havili played like a prop. So we just didn't have the size and intensity in the middle to match that, particularly with Curran out and bringing Lusican onto the bench who didn't even get a game. We just don't have the pack at the moment to go with a really big pack like Souths in a wet weather, sort of arm wrestle. So how we go about changing that, because we saw that we had the same issue up against the Roosters when we played them in the wet weather in Auckland there, and we lost 16-0. So bit concerning for me. I would have liked to have seen Zion or someone come onto the bench instead of Lusic, someone with a bit of size. Who knows how he would have gone up against that big pack, but I'd rather have had that extra prop there rather than having such a small bench. So that's one of the things I noticed. Overall, I thought we didn't play all that bad. Watching the second time without the emotion, knowing the result, we just saw some silly push passes through panic, I think. And they often came from players that you wouldn't expect to see that from. Barnett put a couple down, or put a couple of silly passes in. Tohu put a couple of poor passes in there. Pompey's sort of connection with Montoya wasn't as tight as it has been. It's what happens when you get the pressure and start playing catch-up footy, particularly in those conditions. So I thought guys who stepped up really well. I thought Ford was really, really solid again. Got through a power of work. I think it was 52 tackles he made. He was really heavily involved. Didn't make a lot of those silly mistakes that we've seen from in the past. That was really good. I thought we missed Nia Quarter out on an edge. I thought while Barnett played okay, he's definitely better in the middle. Probably not as much suited on the edge these days, so that was a bit of a shame from him. Tohu, while I thought he looked a little bit lethargic, got through a power of work again, but from a leadership perspective, I would have liked to have seen him step up a little bit more. AFB had another solid hard effort, but they contained him really well with the muscle that they had in the middle there. I thought Metcalf, was energetic and tried a lot throughout the game. Was probably our most sort of the one who was looking the most likely for us. A couple of times he made those little breaks and was just caught by a jersey. So I think in a dry game he would have had a much bigger impact there. I thought Montoya had a pretty solid game. Got through a power of work there. Dallin, dropped a couple of balls and obviously was on the end of that dysfunctional backline a little bit there and got sort of ball in uncomfortable positions, but he tried hard again. It's hard to give anyone man of the match or dick of the day after that effort. As you can tell, I'm not overly full of energy. To be honest, I'm actually sitting here on the back end of COVID. Meant to be flying home today, but got to be here for an extra couple of days now to ride this out before I can get on the plane. So feeling a bit below the weather on top of a pretty piss poor effort from the boys. So disappointing, but hey, when I went back and watched it, it wasn't as bad as I thought. I don't think there are many teams in the comp that would have won that game against South the way they played last night. Probably 2 or 3 max, and that's a reflection on who would have been, who are the genuine top 4 teams. I think the same sort of effort would have beaten probably 9 of the other teams in the comp last night. You wouldn't expect many teams to deliver 96% completion rate in that weather. So hey, time to reset, refocus. I'm sure Webby will have recognised a lot of the things that were wrong. I'm not sure how you fix the lack of size for wet weather footy, because you just can't swap in a whole new team. I just think we have to come up with a different way to play, and I'll leave that for minds smarter than my own to do it. So disappointing, people. I'm still all in. I think if we can get a wet weather game, a dry weather game against Para next week, it'll be a different game. I think we'll have a lot more energy and we'll sort of, be a lot more competitive. But we've got to cut out those errors because they've got some really fast, guys will pounce on the ball and score a lot of tries if we give them 13 errors. So time to sit back, reflect, have a complete reset, come back full of energy next week. Tough to go through a weekend after a Friday loss, but seeing the Storm lose after us made me feel a little bit better. So all in, time for a couple of quiet days. Back on the plane on Monday, hopefully completely COVID free by then. See you all next week for a fresh start.